I don't think term limits is a moral issue. I have friends who don't like term limits. I don't think they're bad people. We have a disagreement about a practical issue and how it will impact politics. However, when you look at the way politicians have tried to go after term limits, it is so slimy and dishonest that it is immoral. Chris and I were the stars, me being not a star and him being a star, that kind of came in to basically add some national perspective and kind of a left-right, even though I'm not really on the right, and I'm not sure he's exactly on the left, but to the effort in Pierce County. In Pierce County, they have 3 measures on the ballot this November. One, to extend term limits, lengthen them, weaken them, make it to where instead of an 8-year limit, it's a 12-year limit, which allows people to serve 50% longer in office and makes things less competitive. And as part of that, they stuck on with that, changing the election date to the off year for some offices. So they've kind of hidden the term limits extension in changing the election date. The second measure changes the election date for other offices. So instead of separating those to be term limit, weakening term limits and changing the election date, they mixed them up so that they could try to hide the term limit part of it. And then, of course, why do they want to change the election date? They want to change it to an election in which fewer voters come out. So we want to stay in office longer. We want fewer voters to come out to vote. And then the third one is to get rid of ranked choice voting, which I believe gives people more choices, better choices, allows you to vote your conscience instead of, voting to, hey, I want to pick the winner. And so it's kind of like, we want to serve longer in office, we don't want you to come out to vote, and we don't want you to have any choices. So there's an effort to vote no, to get a no vote on all 3, and having been the head of U.S. term limits for years, and having, and being a supporter of ranked choice voting and so on, they wanted me to come help, and I thought it was neat because I get to go hang out with Chris Novoselic, and then I can tell everybody, oh yes, Nirvana, yes, I know all those guys, that kind of thing. Which is funny because on the ride down here today, I rode with Chris, and I had to tell him the story of years ago when we got the Nirvana CD. I don't know which one it was, but it was the one where they do a cover of David Bowie's "The Man Who Sold the World," and they do a great job. And so it was a great CD, except my wife and my oldest daughter just played it and played it. Well, we were leaving on a long trip, and I'm sick to my stomach the whole way. And they're playing this CD over and over again. So I was telling them, I said, I really liked your CD, but there was about a 4 to 6 month period where every time I heard it, it was like a Pavlovian response that I felt sick to my stomach. I said, now it's okay, I can listen to it and enjoy it. But anyway, but that was one of the draws. But one of the things that was interesting about this is it's the usual thing about trying to sneak the term limit weakening measure through in some funky, completely dishonest way. But it's also interesting how afraid they are of this ranked choice voting. And to me, ranked choice voting doesn't mean that a third party or independent candidate or somebody else is necessarily going to get elected. It doesn't really change the process that much. What it does that I think is so important is allow people to run and to get the votes of people who think they're the best candidate. Whereas the current system, you might say, well, in 2000, if you're more liberal, you might have said, well, geez, I like Ralph Nader a lot better than Al Gore. But I have to vote for Al Gore so that, George W. Bush doesn't win. Same thing in Washington State. There's been many cases where the Libertarians have had a candidate who was the margin of difference and hurt the Republicans. And of course, that's the Republicans complain about that, but the reality is the Libertarians have a lot to complain about. Because undoubtedly, there were more people who voted for the Republican who would have rather voted for the Libertarian, but they didn't want the Democrat to win. And so, in essence, what we have is, it's not that ranked choice voting, which would allow you to vote for your first choice and then your second choice, and if your first choice is knocked out right off the bat because nobody has a majority and they are the low man on the totem pole, then your second choice gets your vote. So that if you voted for Al Gore, if you voted for Ralph Nader, and Al Gore is your second choice, well, when Nader's knocked out and nobody has a majority, Al Gore gets your vote, so George Bush doesn't win. And the reason I think that's so important isn't so much that it's going to change the outcome of the election in terms of who wins. It will change the outcome of the election in terms of what issues are shown to be popular among the public. In other words, right now, we're being tricked. People are voting for someone they don't believe in as much as somebody else, and that sends a message to the body politic that is incorrect. And so, where Nader's saying, hey, we don't need to have public funds subsidizing stadiums for wealthy guys, or the Libertarians might be saying the same thing, and that might be the majority view, the voters are casting their votes for the two candidates, Republican and Democrat, who say, oh, it's good for our city or our state, let's throw a bunch of millions at millionaires. So to me, it goes back not to, hey, it will change who gets elected, as much as it will change the messages that get sent to both politicians and the public from elections. And so I like ranked choice voting, or instant runoff voting is how it's usually referred to, for that reason, that people will be able to vote the way they really feel without fear of that spoiler effect. It's interesting, though, that because some of the public officials in instituting this ranked choice voting didn't do the best job of explaining it or creating, usually it saves money. The way they've done it, they argue it costs more money because they screwed it up. And so they're using, like the campaign trying to pass these three measures to cut term limits and repeal ranked choice voting and change the election date, are running their whole campaign against ranked choice voting. And their signs say, repeal ranked choice voting, vote yes on 1, 2, and 3. Well, 1 and 2 don't have anything whatsoever to do with ranked choice voting. So, it's one of those things where we want a system in which, like with term limits. I don't think term limits is a moral issue. I have friends who don't like term limits. I don't think they're bad people. We have a disagreement about a practical issue and how it will impact politics. Luckily, about 80% of the people are on my side. But it's not a moral issue. It's a practical issue. However, when you look at the way politicians have tried to go after term limits, it is so slimy and dishonest that it is immoral. And in essence, I made the argument at an event last night that I believe the right policy decision is to vote no on all three measures. But the truth is to send a message to politicians that dishonestly trying to trick voters is so offensive that you ought to vote no on all three no matter what, just to let them know you cannot get away with this. Because in the end, I'm a pretty harsh critic of government. I think government should be smaller. I think it should play a much smaller role in our lives. People have referred to me as anti-government. I think there should be a government, very small. But the one thing there should be, whatever the size of government is, shouldn't we have people in government who are we're on the same side? It shouldn't be public officials versus the people. That's not good in any system. And that's what we have when you have public officials just baldly trying to trick voters. And that it hasn't just happened in Pierce County. All over the country. There are cities like Nashville, Tennessee, or Tampa, Florida, where they pass term limits, and then the politicians put it back on the ballot, not just once, but twice, or 3 times, or 4 times, so that the voters have to vote for it again and again and again, oftentimes with tricky wording that tries to confuse people. And the only thing worse than that is Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and the city council in New York, who we passed term limits, then they put it back on the ballot trying to weaken it. That got slammed, even though they spent a lot more money than our side, and then decided, instead of putting it back on the ballot, let's just repeal it ourselves and ignore the voters. So it's as much as I have pretty strong opinions on term limits and elections and so on, I think the other side is just so bankrupt that it doesn't take someone who agrees on all of these issues. I just think the average person who looks at this says, we've got a very broken system when politicians don't have the decency to just put the issue straightforwardly on the ballot. I have voted for one person in my whole life who's won. And of course I still regret it. But you don't win every time. But at least be straightforward and honest. And I can handle losing in a fair fight, a fair election. But to be screwed over, that's something different, and that creates the kind of cynicism that has long-term, very negative ramifications.